I really hope. But I wanted to tell you where we started from, what we were looking for, and what was apparent. When we started back, and I guess it was 2017, we saw a rising trend of misconduct that was going on in the campuses. And, everybody was attributing it to online, but the truth was we were seeing it happening everywhere. And so we decided we wanted to look into this and how we were going to go about doing it. And so we started looking at, what was happening, what was the cheating going on, how are things happening. We were looking at and beginning to review the literature on academic integrity. These statistics that you see here haven't really changed, despite the fact that the International Center for Academic Integrity reviews these. These were studies that were done by Donald McCabe, who's the sort of, I guess he's the premier, or was the premier researcher and proponent of trying to find ways to prevent misconduct and uphold the ethical underpinnings of academic integrity. You can see here the numbers are amazing, and the Kessler study, which was done much later, these range from 2006 or something to 2015. I don't remember the exact dates, the numbers that you see under the graduate students, undergraduate. But the Kessler study, which was in 2017, is even more suggestive, because it was both online and traditional schools, and 9 out of 10 students admitted to cheating. Contributing factors to this, we realized as we began to look at things, is that students learn to cheat as early as in kindergarten. The recent study released in March of 2020, and this is just, I've tried to update some of the statistics, indicated that 86% of high school students cheat. And by the way, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter if they're good students. They're cheating anyway because they feel they need to continue to be competitive. Paper mills and homework helpers is, we know, a big business. They are, e-learning market was estimated at $144 billion in 2019, and it's expected to reach $374.3 billion by 2026. And one of our nemesis paper mills and sources of for students to purchase papers and things of that nature is Chegg, and Chegg reported at the pandemic, in the second quarter of the pandemic, a 63% year-over-year increase in their earnings. $153 million for the second quarter alone. And that's just amazing. Artificial technology, artificial intelligence can write authentic papers, calculate the complicated math problems, solve engineering problems, and source academic research. So in essence, they can do what a student does. Technology has made collaboration essential to an essential skill set for students. Employers want people who are able to communicate with one another, can work on situations to solve problems, can innovate using collaboration. And so the whole concept of sharing information and not owning it anymore is extremely important. And this is leading us all to, why do students cheat? Well, I'm having a hard time. All right, well, the obvious thing is to get higher grades. Students are fixated on assessment results. To maintain competitive with those who cheat, the average GPA for those who cheat is 3.42 compared to those that don't, which is 2.85. And you can know the difference. You yourselves know the difference about emission standards when we start talking these numbers. it's a huge difference about who's going to get into what grad school, who's going to get into into undergrad with these numbers. So students are walking in already with the idea of, if it's going to get me where I need to go, I'm going to cheat. 90 to 95% think they will not get caught. And they claim they don't have enough time. I didn't know I was cheating, unrealistic education standards. And that may be a question that we know is certainly an issue for surrounding the unrepresented minorities in schools, because they may be coming from situations, high schools or private charter schools or whatever, who are not offering the same kind of teaching and curriculum that they need to be able to be competitive in college. And I was thinking of my son, which I was amazed at when he went taking organic chemistry, and he said to me, I get 3 grades for this class every time I take a test. I get a grade for, for the actual, everybody that's in the classroom, what their grades are. I get a grade for all the other students who were taking it in the school. And then I get a nationwide grade, one where whether I'm competitive with everybody else taking the same class. So when you think about that, that's tremendous pressure all on one test. So sometimes we have to think about that. And as I said, some students are just not prepared for the college curriculum, and that forces them to feel the need to cheat. So what we concluded, from all of this research and what we saw, is that seminal research told us that the ethical underpinning of academic integrity, authenticity, and honesty were being challenged by emerging technologies, by commercial enterprises, and changing societal norms. The idea that, if it's on the internet, if it's on an app that we can attack, you can use that artificial intelligence, that's all right. And I'm remembering a commercial. I want to emphasize this, that you can see every day about the student sitting there, and the father is asking Alexis, when did Pompeii fall? And then later, well, Alexis, what is Mount Vesuvius? And he's telling his child the answers. The child, of course, could use the same information, the same artificial intelligence to get the answers, and our students do. We also found, in reviewing the whole system-wide conversation about and around activities that they have on academic integrity, that there were inconsistencies in the development and use of policies, process, procedures for the appropriate teaching and learning with integrity. That led to a lack of reporting, inadequate education on appropriate conduct for both students and faculty, and confusion over what constitutes academic misconduct, both inside and outside of the classroom. And current USM policies were insufficient to answer the growing challenges of academic misconduct in the academy. Sorry, I got all these panels here on the bottom, so I have to keep moving them so I can see things. We then started to think about, well, how, when we prepare our policy change, we know we needed a policy change. We also saw that the policies were really not adequate for what we knew to be the best practices around teaching and learning and creating the environment that we wanted. The convening that we had told us this. We know that we need to think about how we can improve the policy and how we had to do it. And we had certain goals that we knew in developing it would make it distinctive from what you would normally think of when we start talking about policies and procedures on your campuses. So we knew that we we had to offer the regents for approval had to be anchored in a 36,000 foot perspective. That means it has to be not specifically the things that we know are the best things, but the policy itself has to be coming from from above. How can it apply to everyone? It has to recognize the systems. Universities have varying resources, both in terms of faculty, staff, students, administration, and money. So we can't say, you know, for instance, UMGC had a $2 million ability to work with academic integrity, and we can share things, but obviously, you know, the University of Maryland Eastern Shore is not going to have the same kind of revenue and the same number of faculty, staff, students that all of this has to work with. So we need to be coming up with something that was, you know, that didn't demand that they have to go off and do different things to successfully deal with academic integrity. We knew that due process had to be a fundamental aspect of all processes and procedures for legal protection of the university, students, and faculty. That the idea that, and this has been, was one of the first things that was expressed to me from James Bond at College Park, who works with academic integrity, is that faculty may decide they want to give a 0 because of plagiarism or other, you know, or they discover they can cheat. But the problem is that the student is not given the opportunity to refute the accusation, and so they come after the fact to people like him and say, I didn't get to tell my side of the story. So due process is very important, and it protects the faculty as well, as we talked about very early on in CUSF, when I talked about the fact that you are protected under the state law, and, you know, in terms of sovereign immunity and not being sued individually, as long as you are within the reasonable policies of the school. So again, these kinds of due process aspects and legal aspects are protected. Policy should encourage parity among the institutions, both in its ethical underpinnings and handling of any resulting violation of those ethics. So again, we're trying to look for an overarching concept of what is academic integrity and what is academic misconduct. We didn't want, and then the last thing is that's very important, what we didn't want was we didn't want people to feel that the policies themselves were focused on misconduct, that we wanted the principles of teaching and learning to foster the academic honesty as a benchmark rather than academic dishonesty. And we came by it, and I think this is an honest reaction to the whole issue. And I think as I listened to some of the seminars that they had, workshops that they had with the International Center for Academic Integrity, people come to this issue of honesty and authenticity with the idea of, we know what it isn't. We know when it doesn't happen. I mean, when somebody's violating it, we have a hard time defining it when, you know, in and of itself. So the idea is, you know, what is honesty and how do we want it to happen? And that kind of policy decision. Sorry. We were looking for, so where are we? Currently, the USM has 2 policies related to academic integrity: the policy on faculty, student, and institutional rights and responsibilities for academic integrity. It defines the academic enterprise as one characterized by reasoned discussion between student and teacher and a mutual respect in exchange of the pursuit of knowledge. It lays out wide-ranging student, faculty, and institutional rights and responsibilities, and that includes freedom of expression, grading, you know, and student classroom behavior. It involves a largely punitive relationship between faculty and students, with institutions playing merely an administrative role in the enforcement of sanctions. And this is a big distinction, because in this old existing policy, or in this existing policy, the student has a duty to report misconduct, but the faculty does not. The student is the one that's expected to continue to be honest in the way they do things, but faculty has no obligation. They just have an obligation to grade fairly and to allow the student to express their ideas in the classroom freely. It also does not clarify what is the USM's philosophy regarding truth and honesty in the conduct of teaching. And there's no parity of this. We don't know. Everybody might have their own individual philosophies, and that's fine. But in some way, there needs to be some common ground, and so that we're not setting our students up for inequity. The new policy will shift the focus from faculty-student relationship to one that makes USM students, faculty, administration, and staff jointly responsible and accountable for fostering, sustaining, and holding truth and honesty in the conduct of teaching and learning at USM institutions. We found, this is going to take a village, and we need to be able to share things with one another. We need to be able to support each other in terms of executing our philosophies. And in essence, we need to be able to work as a system to help support our institutions and our reputations as scholastic scholars. I think this is very important for the school. And what's one of the things that distinguishes us from other universities in the world is the ability to be able to support education in its foundation ethics. It specifies, hopefully the new one will specify that each individual group will contribute to the development and implementation of policies, process, and procedures to foster, sustain, and uphold truthful and honest conduct in teaching and learning. So again, the benchmark philosophy is that we're not coming in here to destroy the student and their chances for success, but we are trying to make sure that they do it in an honest way. And this is how we'll get to the proposals that we are going to make. The second policy is policy on misconduct in scholarly work. Some of the schools at USM schools have picked out these 4 or 5 things that are actually defined as what's misconduct. And they use them as policies centered around academic integrity. But in actuality, this particular policy doesn't really apply to the everyday environment of academics. And in other words, it applies to research, it applies to scholarly writing and the creation of works of art. And it focuses more on faculty, staff, and student, as opposed to all the things that we're doing in our classrooms. It specifically actually says we don't cover this. And so we are more concerned in our policy, how can we make sure that that our students are we're teaching and learning activities in our classroom, studio, laboratory, library, instructor approved or authorized study groups, internships, all of this is covered by our policy on academic integrity. So we concluded that we needed to build a commitment to academic integrity across the U.S. system that was positive, informative, recognizing the pressures that all of the things that I've talked about earlier about societal norms, technology, globalization, commercial interests that students are now having to, or challenged by. It's pretty tempting when somebody says, here, pay me $29 and I'll give you a paper. If you're really unhappy and you're at a loss and you don't know if you're going to pass, and that's primary concern, you're pretty tempted to pay that $29. So we have to realize this environment. USM current definition of academic integrity should state the ethical norms and attitudes and actions and activities that are expected from USM students, faculty, administrators, and staff. And you notice we're including administrators and staff because today, when you think about the things with Lori Loughlin and all the other stuff that has happened, there's so much, I classically tell the story of an advisor, not an advisor, rather a person in collecting money for the university from students who haven't paid bills, was asking for emails to support that they from a student to support their premise that they had paid the bill. And instead, the student made the mistake of sending a whole series of emails saying that explaining they were negotiating with someone to take their place in the classroom. So, and working online. And so the end result was that they obviously knew that there was an academic integrity issue, but they didn't know what to do with it. Luckily, they sent it to me because it was my department that was dealing with, and then we could handle it. But these kinds of things do turn up in most unusual ways. And so, we also feel that staff and administrators are in a position where they too need to understand what kinds of activities and what kinds of practices should be encouraged so that our students are not violating our ethics. And those practices should include suggestions from policy, processes, and procedures that support fair and equitable and inclusive development, implementation, administration, enforcement of standards of truth and honesty in teaching and learning in our institutions. So those are the conclusions to the changes, and here are the proposed changes. We are not going to propose to change policy 3-110. I'm telling you that right up front. That's the one on misconduct and scholarly work. At this time, it is connected to some other issues, employment issues, contracts and things of that nature, because we're dealing with faculty as well as students. So we decided that that was something that was beyond our scope. But we did decide to focus on recommending replacement for language in policy 1.00. And that we're intending to promote a philosophy on truth and honesty. We want to clarify the definition of academic conduct as truthful and honest conduct of teaching and learning activities. We want to state students, faculty, administrators, staff, and institutional rights and responsibilities of accountability that will foster and sustain upholding standards for truth and honesty. And we want to provide guidance on what constitutes academic dishonesty in the conduct of teaching and learning. We also want to provide, and notice the word guidance. We're not telling them, although there's a lot of shoulds and shalls, so we're trying to amend, but we do want to say there are some best practices here. Here are the best ways we know from the literature to handle developing the institutional policies, making sure that due process is available, trying to make sure that our students are and faculty and administration are working together to create those policies and procedures and processes, and that they're transparent, they are knowledgeable. Everyone has a responsibility to understand them, and that that this kind of behavior is the expectation. So those are in our guidelines, because we recognize, as we said earlier, that not every school is going to be able to, perhaps have a separate just as an example, one of the best practice policies is that you separate academic conduct issues from other kinds of academic student conduct, like for instance, sexual assault or any kind of theft, any of those things. And a lot of our institutions, not a lot, but some of our institutions don't have that separation. So the same people that are deciding those issues are deciding academic integrity issues. And we know from best practices that that separation is really very important, because the people that are making those decisions need to be vested in the idea of academic integrity. They need to be focused on content and curriculum, and they need to have some focused idea of what decisions they are making. This is our proposed changes to the policies, and that is where we're at. Now, if we look at, excuse me, I need to end my show here and stop sharing if I can find the stop share button and come back in. So if you look at the proposal, and it's a draft, it is not a, we're still in it, we're still talking about it, we're still working with it, but I just felt that after a whole year, it was probably a good idea to let you understand that we've been going through many iterations. We've been working with Joe and Zakia and MJ Bishop to try to achieve goals that we think will work for everyone. And so it's still in a draft form, but I thought it was important to try to bring to you what we've been doing and why, so that you can have some idea of where we're headed. Does anybody have any thoughts, discussion, comments? David.
I was wondering, on page 9 of the draft I have, under 1E, it says that it is the policy of the USM to require disciplinary action for teaching and learning activities and practices that do not reflect truth and honesty. I wonder why the requirement for disciplinary action instead of preserving the opportunity for a more educational engagement.
Well, this is a discussion. Maybe I should open it up. What is it you're really thinking? Rather than you asking me why we're saying it's required, why don't you tell me why you think, what you think needs to be there instead?
Well, that just seemed like a presumptuous way to start, because you guys have been working on this for several years, and so I assumed you had thought about that carefully. But my own view is from my own experience, but as a teacher and also as the frequent chair of our administrative committee that handles student disciplinary questions, is that very often what's called for is taking advantage of an educational opportunity rather than jumping straight to disciplinary action. And so I'll just provide you with an example. We not infrequently have students in our Masters of Science in Law program who come from the intelligence community. And in the IC, we've come to find out that plagiarism is not only rampant, but also expected. And so the idea is that if somebody's gone to the trouble of creating careful language around something, then there is no reason to try to rewrite it or bring in your own innovations, because that creates a lot of possibility for confusion in a fraught, high-risk environment. So the standard practice in a lot of IC circumstances is plagiarism. And so we have students who come over who engage in what I would describe as good faith plagiarism in their first couple of assignments, and they just have to sort of be re-educated into the standards for academic originality in this new environment. And so if we were to jump straight to disciplinary action in that circumstance, it would be a severe misreading of the situation. and a missed opportunity for education. And then, of course, I also teach first-year students at the University of Maryland College Park, and same set of questions frequently come up, where it is a student who comes from, as you recognized earlier, perhaps a different environment in their high school, where these questions were dealt with in a different way or not dealt with at all, and they just have a different set of standards. And it seems a missed opportunity with respect to a first-year undergraduate student to jump straight to disciplinary action when we may well have an opportunity to educate and use this as an opportunity for education. And so again, it seems presumptuous of me not to think that that wasn't part of your conversation to begin with. And so that's why I started by asking the question. But that's what raised, that's the concern behind my question.
Yeah, and I can see it, because we too believe that we believe this. I think
we meant it as an umbrella term, but I can see where the adjective isn't going to work. So if you can suggest a better umbrella term for reacting to discovering that the student needs a teachable moment or action, I would like to hear it. I would like that minute.
And so again, you guys have been doing this for a long time, and so
and that's probably part of the problem, David. We've been through this so many times that we're too close to things, you know. I mean,
I understand, and that's again why I started with the question. So I would hesitate to define disciplinary action elsewhere in the document and include a whole range of different approaches, because that requires somebody to recognize the cross-reference. And I don't know about you, but frequently I skim the definition sections. But maybe something like it's the policy of the University System of Maryland to require addressing or
just to review teaching and learning activities and practices that do not reflect truth and honesty, or consider.
I mean, I think affirmatively address, right? Because one of the other things that we frequently see is that faculty are just like, this is not worth my time, right? They see the plagiarism review on Blackboard that says 75%, and they're just like, I don't want to deal with it. On to the next paper. And so encouraging people to proactively address it, either through disciplinary action or through education, I think would probably do the trick. And I'm spitballing the language, so apologies for being inelegant.
David, I have a question about your IC students. I think that's what you call them. When they write those papers and, you know, they don't feel the need to, you know, kind of make it their own language because it's been done so well by, you know, whomever else, do they cite those areas like where they got the information from, or do they just copy and paste them into their work?
Not always. And again, we've just come to find out that that's part of the culture inside the IC. And frankly, it makes me a little bit worried about the IC, because part of the problem there is that you get the perpetuation of a mistake, or the risk of a perpetuation of a mistake. So something that's oft repeated becomes truth. But that just seems to be the norm inside the IC. And so again, we now recognize it. And so one of the things that we ask professors in our sort of first and second semester MSL courses to do is to be very clear up front, and even take the time to specifically reach out to students who are coming from the IC or even from law enforcement communities, and just say, just so we're clear, you are in a new world now. This is not your work environment. And so what is encouraged in your work environment is plagiarism here. And so, and because we've recognized that pattern, we don't have nearly as many problems as we had in the first couple of years of the program.
Awesome. Okay, thank you.
You know, and that's an interesting point, because I have the same problem in business, because people say, you know, I don't have to use APA to cite support when I'm sitting in a table discussing, you know, new ideas or solutions to problems. You know, but you still have to support it. And that's the whole point, I think, behind it is we are, you know, they come in and they say, well, I do this at work. Oh, why do I have to do this? You know, and it is the academic aspect of it, and it is academic integrity. So, you know, I think this is going to become more and more of an issue as we go on. But for right now, that sounds good to me. I like affirmatively addressed. I think that's a good one. Or I think Sabrina said proactively. Anybody else got any more comments? Ideas, thoughts?
I did just one other thing, and this might be a question for Joe, but there's the requirement for the production of additional paperwork at the end. And I don't know whether that's something that can easily be dealt with, doesn't really add too much in terms of the administrative burden of the university's presidents or the chancellor. But that's also something that anytime I see a requirement for producing more paperwork, I always wonder who's going to have to do it and whether they have the time.
Yeah, thanks for that, David. Wanted to let you all know, first of all, an enormous amount of work has gone into this by Mary and Elizabeth and others and so on, and it is greatly appreciated. We are at the phase right now that my office is working with the Attorney General's office. I will tell you that one of the kind of overarching issues that we're going to have to go through is actually what belongs inside the policy itself versus what is in the introductory part of the policy. And this, we don't have the expectation that faculty are experts in actually writing policy, and that's why we engage the Office of the Attorney General along with our office. And so we're going to be still going through this over the next few. I think we have at least 1 or 2 meetings already set up with the Attorney General's office to go through this. But it's not that we've been dragging our feet. There have been a few other things going on, but we wanted to get the richness of the faculty thought on this. And David, one of the points you made there, I mean, we would have the AG's office or our office might have additional language or different language rather than going straight to disciplinary action or whatever. There are standard phrases in HR work. And those are some of the kinds of things that the Office of the Attorney General office often picks up on. But we wanted to make sure that by the end of this year, that those who had already spent an enormous amount of time first of all, get credit for all of that work, because it has been hard work, to have other people look at it as you have, David, so that when we now go through this from the legal pure policy point, we know that the content that is desired there, the structure may look different when it comes out the other end, but we clearly understand the intention here of flipping this on its, number one, flipping it's on its head rather than focusing on dishonesty, focusing on honesty and the culture of and the approach to being really important. But then the actual USM policy and what we ask individual campuses to put in policy and procedures may look different after we get through it with the policy comb and the legal comb from the AG's office. I don't know whether that helps or merely confuses you, but that's kind of where we are.
Anybody else have any thoughts? Susan.
Yes, I mean, I really like the term proactively address, and it seems to me we do have these different students, the adult learners who've been in the workforce. And I find this too, even with my master's students and my DNP students who come back to get a degree as a nurse practitioner, is that they are so used to working in the workforce that they need reoriented to academic policies and also to the library and citations and everything. So I think, you know, as institutions look at how they would implement these policies, really looking to their student success centers from a different angle, because I think the angle they use is, oh, we want them to get good grades and graduate, when really part of our partnership is that they do that. However, they need to do it in a sound way academically, and understand perhaps the processes beyond, go behind writing a paper, or making a claim about something and how to cite them. We do a lot of this with our third year students when they come to us from the community colleges and our 2+2 nursing programs, but I don't think we do enough of it with our returning workforce students. And I think that hits the group that David was talking about. They're so inculcated and they know the work of their organization. They can probably cite the policy to you. Why they don't refer to it appropriately, or cite it appropriately, or even question it in the process, are things we need to look for and help them through. And perhaps all of our institutions need to think about implementing something for these adult learners.
Joe.
Yeah, Susan, that was point well made. The other group that we have to constantly keep in mind is international students. And what they bring. I see a lot of head shaking. We know that's an issue. We know that people come from different cultures who perceive and have been trained in a very different way. And I know that many of our campuses actually have some special sessions, orientation sessions for their international students, which is probably a pretty good idea, that this might be one of the points made. But there are these different groups that we, in fact, I'm really glad that you all as faculty leaders are pointing this out. Whether it ends up exactly in this policy or not is one thing, but to highlight that we need to focus on this and get our heads around it and act on it proactively, I think is point well made.
See, I think that's the biggest problem with developing this policy, is that we know that we want to do these things, but we can't get in the weeds of how to do it. And that's what we were hoping to do in the guidelines, because if that's what we're going to do it, because we know those are the best practices. I mean, it's very, very important, as Teresa, see, this is why I can't stay up in the morning at nighttime and get up in the morning. I'm just not a morning person. Teresa Gallant, who's considered one of the premier people in academic integrity, makes in her articles makes a very big point of how each institution needs to develop the policies and the processes and the philosophy that they have, and as a system that they need, it's special to their needs. And so, as a system, we can't tell them what that is, but there needs to be some commonality at the same point. We do know, and it's important to know that when this whole started, the Regents asked CUSF to take the lead in this, and we've tried to do that, and we've come to the understanding that we need to make sure that certain things are across the board. If system's going to be involved in this, we need to know that people have access to their policies and procedures and processes, that they understand them, that they can work with them on a regular basis. We know that many schools, they still don't exist. And so faculty can't tell you where they are or what they are. Faculty are handling it, or they're inconsistent. Some schools will say, well, the department chair and the department will figure it out, that they'll handle it. And so one department might be doing something that the other one isn't doing. Again, how do you make that bring some if one department thinks the key is to go in and nail the students to the wall, and the other one's saying, no, we need to reform them, we have a problem. So the idea is, an approach and a behavior and a definition of these things is what the purpose of this policy was about. And the important thing, I think, also was the commitment that all the people in the institutions need to be responsible for this. You can't just say it's only faculty and students, because that doesn't work. We need to have everybody involved in it. And I think that was the reason we were approaching the way we were. How do we solve this 36,000 foot perspective down and not get in the weeds? So,
Elizabeth.
yeah,
Hi, everyone. Zakia from the system office. Some of you have probably heard this before, but I'll just say it for the good of the order. As Joe mentioned, the process that Elizabeth started with what's been happening since 2017, where we are now, pulling in the Office of the Attorney General, our office. The other groups by whom this will need to pass at some point are the provost. I know Elizabeth has been in touch with the USM Student Council so that they may be involved in the conversation at some point. But I want to mainly speak to the provost. A challenge to you all, or an ask maybe, is that you need to let your faculty senates know, or your provost know, or both know if you think this needs to move forward. Because if it goes to the provost and they don't see what the problem is with fixing, if they don't agree, if they think it can be handled another way, then we end up diverted, for lack of a better word, again. And whether it was academic integrity or Greek life or anything, it's not just this policy. We wouldn't take it to the Board of Regents if it doesn't have the backing of the groups who are most affected by it. So although at some point we can probably take this and say CUSF supports it, the regents will say, okay, so what do the presidents and the provost say? And if they haven't heard of it because it's not getting back to them through you all, so it's known that CUSF has been doing this since 2017, on top of what Joe is saying, on top of what Elizabeth is saying to them, because Elizabeth is in those provost meetings. But this is just a note that the provost will have to back this too. And you all can help it by making sure it's known in your Senate, making sure it's supported, making sure that the problems are ones that you all agree need to be addressed. You know, Joe and MJ and I will continue to work with Mary and Elizabeth to get it where the legal folks say it needs to be. And you'll see it again because, you know, we said that there are at least a couple more meetings, but some groundwork probably needs to be laid so that when it gets to the provost, they understand that you all are part of conversations about the direction this may need to go.
Karen.
In speaking about the faculty senates, I know Susan and I and others have brought it up, obviously, and try to keep our faculty senate up to date, but they've never had any significant written information, anything to look at other than us reporting. So at least from my knowledge anyway, Susan, you could add a bit, but I'm wondering, even the PowerPoint, Elizabeth, that you provided today with some general information that we've discussed about today, that some of the language that needs to be and is being addressed, would that be beneficial to share with our faculty senates to get them more engaged?
Well, I have no problem with that as long as they understand that this is, you know, an iterative process and it's, you know, this is a draft, but this is where we're headed. I have no problem with it. I don't know how, Joe, I don't know how you and Zakia feel about that. We partially haven't done that in the past because we didn't know if we were far enough along in what we were doing.
We were encouraged to keep drafting before we started to circulate the actual language, Karen. But this began with everybody on campus, our convening. How many years ago was that?
And
this all began at the campus level.
Meetings, still has meetings with the team leads from that convening.
There's
one coming up in a week, 2 weeks.
I don't hear anything at all really in our faculty senate about it at all. And other than what we report, there's no real discussion. And the reason I bring it up is because of even what Zakia was saying, which makes sense, perfect sense. We have to go through those groups. And there has to be
and that's the next phase, Karen. This is today. It's for everybody here to get a sense of where we're going, so we can move to that next stage. And in the interim, while we are reviewing here, there's also the hopefully end of finishing touches with OAG, which also is happening this week and maybe might go beyond this week, but hopefully not too far beyond. We're nearing the end of this drafting process, and the wheels will now start moving for these other things that Zakia and you have been talking about.
That's a good point. Let me just pop back in, but you do have some other hands up, Elizabeth. Thank you for the
Okay.
question, Karen. Mary and Elizabeth are right. We discouraged the circulation of the draft for the very reason that Mary just stated. So maybe part of what needs to happen, and I'm just thinking this through as we go, especially since you just canceled the June meeting, is that if something happens between May and June, as soon as we let Elizabeth know if something is ready to move or if something's going to the provost, or because the provost haven't seen it either. So your point is well taken, Karen. The provost haven't, no one's seen it yet besides you all, and us who are trying to help with it. So maybe if something happens in the interim between May and when you all meet again officially, there can be some emails to say, all right, we're moving on to this step, and here's what's going to happen next. So the provost will hear it then. So start talking about it now. And here's the adjusted version, because as you noted, we agreed to some changes here. So maybe it's just more of a listen out for when it is time to have those more explicit conversations with your Senate if they have not been happening yet, or with your academic integrity contacts that Mary and Elizabeth are referring to, the people who've been in some of those conversations that have been led by the Kerwin Center and the ICAI.
I was just thinking in terms of the generalized information, that almost like what you've got on the outline on the PowerPoint, as opposed to the full draft, is what I was thinking.
Yeah, the purpose.
PowerPoint may be reasonable.
Yeah, that's true. That's fine, no problem. Doris.
Yes, hi Elizabeth. I think, well, Zakia somehow responded to my question, but it's still unclear. So given the fact that the document is still in drafting status, and more discussions are going to happen before it becomes a more established document, is this really a good time to share that with the Provost yet and the Faculty Senate, or the idea is to share it as it is with the Office of the Provost as a way of starting the conversation at each institution? What would be the best thing, the best next step for us to do? To wait until the next reiteration of the document, or start the conversation with the document as it is?
Yeah, I think so, Doris. I think, to wait on the draft itself, because A, you all just talked about some changes here, and then B, we know that there probably will be some from the Office of the Attorney General, so we don't know what the document itself will look like in a week. But it sounds like Elizabeth is okay with the PowerPoint being shared and being a tool for some discussion, because it does lay out very well what the group, we keep saying Elizabeth and Mary, but there were lots of folks involved, and I know everyone has worked so hard, but lays out the foundation and the questions and what the draft, what the amendments will propose to do. So the framework is in the PowerPoint. And if Elizabeth is okay with sharing that, and you all, can use that as a point of discussion, but then I think it is probably better to hold off for Elizabeth and or Mary and teams to say, okay, here's the next version, now go, whenever that happens.
That
Yeah,
was
that
also
makes
the
sense.
reason we
Thank you.
circulated the summary, Doris, in April, so that you all could use it in your next Senate meetings or wherever. It's the 2-page
Okay.
document everybody got in April, and again today for today's
Yes.
meeting.
Sounds reasonable. Thank you.
I want to say one other thing about, you may get pushback. I get emails all the time. Where are we headed? What are we doing? I know the presidents are interested in it. I asked to cancel the meeting with MJ because, the last meeting in October, all of the heads were saying, we're waiting for CUSF, we're waiting for CUSF. And I didn't want to go without anything at that point. So yeah, I think this is one of the reasons I wanted to spend this time today to talk about it. And I think just want to let you know where we're at and that we are trying to get this resolved, because it is our goal to get it ultimately passed. So we want to make sure everybody is on board with what we do. And the best way to do it is present them with something that we know is solid to begin with. I don't want to waste their time any more than you do. So that's one of the reasons it's taken a while. And I think it'll all work out in the end. But Mike, you got your hand up.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. And I want to thank you and the rest of the committee for your work on this. And so I like the direction this is going in terms of what you said about institutions having a substantial amount of flexibility in terms of how they implement this. I think it's absolutely critical, given the range of institutions we have in the system, to allow that flexibility to go forward. That being said, there's some parts of particularly the guidance and some of the definitions of things that seem like if they were strictly applied would be way overboard, or not overboard, but I think they're too broad and they catch too many things. So things like some of the plagiarism language looks like it's too specific. If institutions brought that on, it would cover behaviors or it would potentially ensnare students in behaviors that are often in a gray area, and that it's very difficult to establish critically as, yes, this is absolutely plagiarism, this is not. Similarly, some of the stuff in teaching, it seems like there's one part of it that says even downloading course materials isn't allowed, when that's what, at least how in our program, we expect our students to download all our course materials as part of it. And from my perspective, that's part of what they're getting from their tuition dollars, is access to those course materials that they can retain. And so I suspect those sorts of things aren't intended, but given the number of definitions under each of those things, I think it's almost inevitable that some of them become a little bit off. So thank you.
Hey, Mike, can you send me an email or a text message on where you thought you saw downloading course materials might be not allowed in the language? Because obviously at UMGC, we wouldn't want that to be happening as a guideline or a standard. And I'm not aware that I've got that in there. For the other thing, I just want to make clear that the guidelines have all those many different items mentioned, because it is to say it could be this, it could be this. It's up to the institution to decide whether it applies to them. It's just a very broad general, these are kinds of things that have been or could be considered, for example, plagiarism. So I do want that to be clear about the guidelines. That's why it looks like the kitchen sink is in there, because it could be you didn't think about X, or maybe you thought about Y and never about A, and maybe they are both going to be something you want to talk about on your campus or set a policy for. So that might explain why it's so very, very specific and sometimes so very, very broad.
Yeah, I will definitely send you some of the areas highlighted that caught my eye as I was going through it, and that explanation about it being could, I took it as they are rather than could be, and so that context is really important. And
could be. It's
yeah,
definitely could be.
Okay, does anybody else got anything? And I want to also add, all of you, in the next, before you go off on your, wherever it is you're going to go, if you're not working over the summer and you have thoughts on this, in terms of the language that you see, let us know, send an email to us, give us specifics as to what it is. That helps us. We send these things out to you all and ask for your opinions as well. So definitely get us information if you can.